A young black woman, serving as the CEO of a rising tech firm, stepped into the sleek private jet showroom at the heart of the city airport, intent on acquiring an aircraft to support her company's operations. Instead of the warm greeting she had earned through years of hard work, she found herself under a harsh microscope, judged and mocked for her unassuming outfit and the color of her skin. Could such cruel prejudices derail her dreams? This story stands as a powerful reminder of each person's true worth and the ongoing struggle against injustice in our society. Jessica Morgan, the youthful black CEO of Morgan Tech, a household name in cutting-edge technology, paused at the showroom's glass facade. Brilliant sunlight streamed through, illuminating gleaming jets whose polished exteriors signaled luxury, power, and prestige. Yet Jessica herself was dressed with striking simplicity. No designer handbag slung over her shoulder, no glittering jewelry catching the light. Instead, she'd stepped out of a modest economy sedan wearing a crisp white button-down shirt, dark jeans, and well-worn sneakers. It was a silent declaration. Real value lives beneath the surface. The instant she crossed the threshold, whispers rippled through the spacious marble-floored hall. Sales staff and affluent bystanders alike cast sidelong glances, as though testing her right to be there. Jessica's footsteps echoed alone amid the hum of hushed conversations and the faint click of distant heels. At the reception desk, a female attendant arched a skeptical brow, then pretended to type furiously on her computer. Nearby, a pair of potential buyers exchanged knowing smirks, comments Jessica couldn't quite hear but knew to be unkind. Unfazed, she pressed forward and let her eyes settle on a perfectly maintained Gulfstream G650, its white fuselage gleaming like a beacon. At that moment, all external distractions faded, the cool metal beneath her fingertips, the low thrum of greatness ready to take flight. Years of dedication had forged Morgan Tech from a fledgling startup into an industry titan, and this jet was more than just business transportation. It embodied her perseverance, drive, and unbreakable spirit. Just as she allowed herself a hopeful smile, a clipped voice cut through the stillness. "Excuse me, ma'am, but this is a private jet showroom, not a free museum." Jessica turned to see a sharply dressed young man in a black suit, his lips curled in disdain. His tone left no doubt. This encounter would test not only her professional ambitions but her pride and dignity as a trailblazing CEO. The moment Jessica stepped inside, her unadorned appearance made her the center of attention. The sales staff and nearby customers began whispering and sneering. The once quiet, luxurious space reserved for the elite now hummed with suspicion at the sight of this young woman, so unlike anyone they'd ever seen there before. Greg Reynolds, a swaggering sales rep stationed near the reception desk, fixed Jessica with a cold, contemptuous glare. Greg prided himself on his keen eye for discerning high-value clients, an ability he believed had made him the showroom's top performer for months. In his book, a prospective buyer always wore designer labels, flashed an expensive watch, and stepped out of a luxury car. Jessica didn't fit any of those criteria. "What is she doing in here?" Greg muttered under his breath, just loud enough for his colleagues nearby to hear. A young female associate standing beside him chuckled in agreement. "Probably just wants a selfie or two," she whispered, barely concealing her derision. Greg crossed his arms, his eyes never leaving Jessica. He noted every detail, her simply tied-back hair, her plain white shirt, the pair of ordinary sneakers anyone could afford. He was convinced she was either a curious tourist or someone pretending to be wealthy for a few moments' amusement. As Jessica approached the gleaming white Gulfstream, Greg's scowl deepened. He'd lost count of how many times he'd seen outsiders wander in here to daydream. To him, people like Jessica were a waste of his time and a risk to the showroom's reputation. Unable to hold back any longer, Greg marched over, striking the authoritative pose he reserved for customers he deemed unworthy. "Excuse me," he said, his tone a mix of feigned politeness and barely hidden mockery. "As I mentioned, this is a private jet showroom, not a place for photo ops." Jessica turned and met his gaze. Her eyes were steady and clear, reflecting an inner strength that briefly unsettled Greg, though he quickly dismissed the thought. "I know exactly where I am," she replied, her voice calm but powerful. "And I'm here to inquire about and purchase a jet, not to take pictures." Greg raised an eyebrow, his smirk growing more pronounced. He stepped closer, folding his arms in a provocative challenge, as if determined to crush any ambition she might harbor. "Oh, really?" he drawled, extending each syllable as he scanned her from head to toe, drawing the attention of nearby onlookers. "So, you've come prepared with the funds to buy one, I take it? Or do you still think a private jet costs about as much as an economy car?" His biting words carried across the showroom, drawing curious glances and stifled laughter. The atmosphere grew tense. Jessica said nothing at first. She paused, sizing up Greg with a discerning gaze, as if memorizing every detail of the man who dared question her worth. "I don't believe a customer's value is measured by appearances," she answered evenly, her eyes shining with resolve. Greg faltered for a split second at her composed retort, then quickly reverted to his haughty stance. "I've seen plenty like you," he sneered. "People who come in here pretending they can afford a jet, only to leave embarrassed and disappointed. If you think you belong here, be my guest. Just don't make a fool of yourself." The showroom felt stifling. Jessica stood surrounded by judging eyes, while Greg wore his triumphant smirk of contempt. What he didn't realize was that this woman wasn't easily cowed by baseless barbs. Jessica Morgan had endured far greater trials, and she understood that this wasn't just about a jet, but about defending her dignity and the principle of fairness she would never abandon. The tension in the air mounting by the second, Greg stepped even closer to Jessica, his face still etched with that familiar smugness. He cocked his head slightly, sizing her up from head to toe with a look equal parts appraisal and derision, then spoke in a cutting tone. "Are you sure you're in the right place? This is a private jet showroom, not a discount supermarket." Greg's words rang out sharply, laced with provocation. Everyone nearby stopped in their tracks. Some customers turned fully toward Jessica, forming a curious ring around her. To them, it was an unexpected spectacle, a bit of entertainment in an otherwise staid luxury space. Jessica drew in a slow, steady breath, maintaining her calm. Her eyes locked onto Greg's, reflecting an unshakable resolve. "I know exactly where I am," she replied evenly but unmistakably. "And I know exactly why I'm here." Greg let out a short, contemptuous laugh. He took a half-step back, folding his arms as though preparing to watch a favorite pastime, this unwelcome guest's humiliation. His expression grew harder, colder, shedding whatever veneer of civility he'd shown moments before. "Then let me be clear," he said, emphasizing each word like a sharpened blade. "We sell jets here that cost millions. Our clients are bona fide entrepreneurs, celebrities, successful, wealthy, and, importantly, they know what they're doing. I see nothing about you that suggests you belong here, much less can afford a jet." A few nearby customers nodded in agreement, their approving looks fueling Greg's smugness. He prided himself on the right to judge, rank, and categorize anyone who walked through these doors, and in his eyes Jessica was just another inexperienced young woman clearly out of her financial league. Jessica swept her gaze across the showroom, refusing to flinch from any of the scrutinizing stares. In her mind, this was no longer simply a jet purchase. It was a battle for honor, a confrontation over human worth. "So, tell me," Jessica asked, her tone politely challenging, "what does qualify someone to be here? Must one don only designer labels and arrive in a luxury car to become a legitimate customer?" Greg hesitated, taken aback by her bold defiance, but quickly recovered. He curled his lip in a cold smile. "I'm not being prejudiced. It's just the reality. This place caters to an exclusive class. If you truly belong, you'd know that. But if you insist on this charade, you'll be the one making a fool of yourself." A flush of anger rose in Jessica's chest, but she restrained it, knowing that an outburst would only deepen the biases of her onlookers. Instead, she chose the most rational response. "I don't believe a person's worth is determined by clothing or appearances," Jessica said firmly. "And I'm certain there's no rule in this showroom that prohibits me from being here because of my outfit." Greg frowned in irritation. He clearly disliked being publicly challenged. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice to ensure only she could hear, as his final assertion of dominance. "Maybe you should leave now, before you're laughed out of here." Jessica stood silent for a moment, her sharp gaze locked on Greg's arrogant face. Her eyes burned with fierce determination, a warning that he'd made a grave misjudgment. "You really think you know me that well?" Jessica replied softly, a defiant smile curving her lips. "Let's just see who ends up regretting their assumptions." Her words caused Greg to flinch ever so slightly, though he quickly shoved away any doubts. Still, for the first time, his arrogant confidence showed a hairline crack, a fragile uncertainty even he barely noticed. At that moment, the showroom doors swung open and a few new clients entered. All they saw first was the heavy tension hanging in the air, a sure sign that a storm was about to break. The moment Jessica finished speaking, the showroom felt suffocating with mounting tension. Greg's eyes darkened, and his smug expression stiffened into obvious discomfort. Sensing an opportunity to showcase their own superiority, the surrounding customers stopped whispering, and instead let their cruel taunts ring out loud and clear. "Maybe she thinks these jets are on a clearance sale," called out a sharply dressed middle-aged man, loud enough for everyone in the showroom to hear. A few nearby customers chuckled in agreement, a wave of mockery rolling through the room. A young woman in an expensive dress, standing several feet away, covered her mouth with her hand, yet enunciated each word. Or maybe she thought this was a thrift store and just wandered in. These barbs cut deep, aimed straight at Jessica's pride. Greg stood back with his arms crossed, a triumphant sneer on his lips as though he'd orchestrated the entire spectacle. In his mind, the more powerful customers piled on, the faster Jessica would crumple in shame and be forced to leave. Jessica remained perfectly still, her fists clenching just slightly, but her expression stayed calm and composed. In that moment, her heart beat a little faster, but she knew every pair of eyes in the room waited for her to show weakness. This wasn't the first time she'd faced bias and suspicion. She'd encountered it countless times building her career, but never so brazenly and so publicly. Observing Jessica's steadfast silence made Greg even more uneasy. He stepped a little closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear, his words dripping with malice. "See, this is what happens when you try to step into a place where you don't belong. You'd better leave now, before your dignity is completely destroyed." His words carried an unspoken threat, But Jessica didn't respond in anger. Instead, she let her gaze sweep across the room, quietly memorizing every face delighting in another's humiliation. She realized that for these people, outward appearances were the sole measure of a person's worth, and that prejudice was so deeply ingrained in how they saw the world. Choosing a strategic silence instead of firing back, she understood that her quiet defiance would unsettle her attackers far more than any retort, yet their cruelty only grew bolder. A man, leaning against one of the luxury jets, called out mockingly, "She's probably here just to snap a few pics for her social feed, pretending to be wealthy for 5 minutes." Greg immediately joined in, offering a self-satisfied laugh. "See what I mean? Social media makes everyone think they can play the part of the elite. Too bad reality can't be faked." Their laughter swelled, intensifying Jessica's discomfort under a sea of judging stares. She felt the pressure of their gaze, but a fierce determination ignited within her. She knew that if she gave in now, they would believe their prejudice was justified. In her mind, she heard her mother's steady voice, "When they try to pull you down, stand taller than ever." With that, Jessica lifted her chin. Her eyes blazed as she stared directly at Greg and the mocking crowd, silently declaring that neither insults nor scorn would ever bend her spirit. Greg froze for a moment, taken aback by her unwavering defiance. A flicker of unease crossed his face. He'd expected her to collapse under pressure, but her unbreakable resolve threw him off balance. Even he didn't fully recognize the doubt now creeping into his mind. Around them, the other customers began exchanging hushed whispers tinged with curiosity and skepticism. They wondered who this woman really was, and how she could maintain such poise and dignity in the face of so much cruelty. In that suspended moment, the showroom itself seemed to hold its breath. Everyone waiting to see what Jessica would do next, while Jessica herself knew this battle had only just begun. Amid the thick, nearly unbearable tension, Jessica stood her ground with unwavering eyes, though deep inside, she felt each cruel taunt eroding her strength bit by bit. Greg lingered before her, a cold, triumphant smile etched across his face, his steely gaze declaring in no uncertain terms that she didn't belong here, and he wouldn't stop until she crawled away in shame. Suddenly, from the showroom entrance, a warm, authoritative voice cut through the hostility. "Jessica, is that you?" Jessica turned toward that familiar voice, her eyes lighting up as Marcus Bennett, her close college friend, strode purposefully toward her. He cut a striking figure in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, polished leather shoes, and a sleek briefcase, every inch the top human rights attorney he'd become. "Marcus? What are you doing here?" Jessica asked, relief washing over her at the sight of him. Marcus took in the scene in an instant, recognizing the hateful stares aimed at Jessica, and especially Greg's arrogant contempt. As a leading lawyer in personal dignity and civil rights cases, he needed no explanation for the low-level bigotry playing out before him. "I had a meeting with a client nearby," Marcus replied, locking eyes with Greg. His gaze was so sharp that Greg instinctively recoiled a step. Catching Greg off guard, Marcus placed a reassuring hand on Jessica's shoulder and addressed everyone within earshot. "I see what's happening here, but Jessica, remember, anyone who judges you by appearances isn't worth your attention. I know who you are and everything you've accomplished. Don't let anyone shake your belief in your own value." His words rang clear through the showroom, an unapologetic rebuke to Greg and the crowd. A few nearby customers shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another in sudden embarrassment. Some even wondered if they'd been too quick to join in the mockery of someone they didn't truly know. Greg bristled, feeling his control slip away. "I don't know who you are," he snapped at Marcus, tone challenging though now edged with uncertainty. "But if you're really friends, maybe you should advise her to avoid causing a scene. We're just protecting this showroom's reputation." Marcus turned on Greg, his eyes as cold and unflinching as steel. "You might choose your words more carefully," he said. "If by protecting your reputation you mean discriminating against customers based on how they look, then you're the one whose integrity is in question." Greg found himself at a loss for words. His first real moment of doubt since he'd confronted Jessica. Marcus's presence carried not just the authority of a successful professional, but the unmistakable weight of legal consequence, reminding Greg that continued prejudice here could be costly. Jessica felt the burden on her chest lighten, gratitude shining in her eyes as she met Marcus's steady gaze. He leaned in and spoke softly enough for her alone. "You're not alone in this. I'm here with you. Don't let their empty words define who you are." Jessica nodded, a small, determined smile forming as a renewed inner strength took hold. She knew this fight had become bigger than her alone. It was a stand against prejudice and a defense of every person's true worth. And Greg, for the first time in his vaunted sales career, felt an unfamiliar unease. He realized this confrontation was far from over, and that the unexpected arrival of Marcus Bennett, renowned civil rights attorney, was only the beginning of far greater troubles ahead. Just after Marcus's firm words, the showroom's atmosphere visibly deflated, and the mocking whispers fell silent, if only for a moment. That brief hush was shattered by a voice dripping with contempt from behind Jessica and Marcus, clearly intended to draw everyone's attention. "Does she think this place offers layaway plans? Snap back to reality, please." Jessica turned and fixed her gaze on the speaker. Richard Davis, a well-known local tycoon who owned a chain of luxury hotels across the U.S. He stood confidently, hands in his pockets, eyes cold but gleeful as he watched Jessica's discomfort. His tailored navy suit and the expensive watch on his wrist caught the showroom lights, underlining his wealth and power. The instant Richard finished speaking, a few light chuckles rippled through the crowd. Greg broke into a triumphant grin, as if he'd just found a powerful ally. Richard was famous not only for his fortune, but also for his blunt, caustic remarks. He never hesitated to puncture a person's pride. Greg knew that with Richard joining him, both Jessica and Marcus were about to face much greater pressure. Richard took a few deliberate steps forward, closing the distance just enough to gauge Jessica's reaction, his mocking smile unwavering. His eyes, sharp as knives, scrutinized her for any sign of weakness to exploit in front of the entire showroom. "My young lady," Richard said, speaking slowly but with intimidating weight, "I've seen many who strut in here pretending to afford a jet, only to leave humiliated. If you truly belong, prove it. Don't waste our precious time." His words struck Jessica like a volley of sharp stones, embedding themselves in her mind. This was the most direct, public, and provocative challenge she'd ever faced. The onlookers no longer bothered to mask their amusement. They watched her eagerly, waiting to see how she'd respond. Marcus glanced at Jessica, his face calm but his eyes betraying concern. He wanted to help, but understood that this was Jessica's moment to stand tall and prove her own worth. He gave her a slight nod, an unspoken message that she was not alone in this challenge. Jessica inhaled deeply, then looked Richard Davis straight in the eyes, unbowed by the weight pressing down on her. She knew that if she backed down now, these prejudices would prevail. Pride and resolve swelled within her. "I don't believe I'm obligated to prove my finances to you. "Or anyone here," Jessica said clearly, her tone measured but powerful. "But if you truly think appearances mean everything, perhaps it's you who needs to update that outdated mindset." Richard's brow furrowed in surprise at her poised defiance. He wasn't used to being confronted, especially by a young woman he'd dismissed at first glance. He let out a mocking chuckle, though a flicker of unease crossed his expression. "Your confidence is admirable," Richard replied slowly, his gaze colder than before. "But we deal in real money here, not in fantasies." Greg, standing nearby, savored every word. He believed this cutting remark would make Jessica falter or flee on the spot. But Jessica didn't flinch. She pulled her phone from her pocket, opened her banking app, and calmly walked up to Richard Davis, holding the screen level with his eyes. "Mr. Davis, if you still doubt my ability, here's my personal account balance," she said, letting the app's figures flash before him. "I hope this clarifies that a person's value isn't defined solely by their clothes." Richard went silent, eyes widening at the colossal number displayed on Jessica's phone. Murmurs of astonishment rippled through the showroom. Those who'd just been mocking her now stood frozen, as if witnessing the impossible. Greg nearly collapsed in shock. His face drained of color. He'd never imagined Jessica could truly outmatch his expectations. Behind her, Marcus allowed himself a discreet, satisfied smile. He knew Jessica wasn't one to show off needlessly. This gesture was simply her strongest statement yet against every doubter. Jessica lowered her phone and looked Richard in the eye, her voice cold and commanding. "Now, unless you have any further questions, I'd be happy to proceed with my business." Richard Davis remained silent, a rare flush of shame rising within him. He realized he'd gravely misjudged her. For Jessica, this moment was more than proof of her financial means. It was a bold declaration of equality and respect she rightfully deserved. The showroom air still crackled with stunned silence after Jessica's challenge. Richard Davis, the powerful man who'd confidently taunted her, now couldn't maintain his composure. He frowned, his eyes narrowing in doubt, wondering if Jessica really had the financial means she claimed, or if this was some reckless stunt to save face. Behind her, Greg clenched his fists, his heart pounding with worry for the first time. He'd always believed Jessica was a fraud. Someone all show and no substance, but her bank app reveal had cracked that certainty wide open. Jessica scanned the room, noting the mix of curiosity and tension on every face trained on her. Not wanting to prolong their suspense, she reached into her suit jacket, drew out a slim slip of paper, and calmly held it aloft. A payment check written for the exact price of the Gulfstream she'd chosen. Overhead lights gleamed off the bold dollar amount, each digit proclaiming her true purchasing power more loudly than any insult ever could. The showroom fell into absolute stillness. No one uttered a word. Those who'd jeered at her now looked shell-shocked, their contempt replaced by embarrassment at having misjudged this young woman so thoroughly. Richard Davis opened his mouth as if to speak, but no sound came. He'd just taken a blow to his pride. Shame flashed in his eyes before he averted his gaze, unable to meet Jessica's steely stare. Greg froze in place, staring at the check as if it were a verdict condemning him. His initial arrogance had vanished, replaced by utter confusion. He realized that his biggest mistake wasn't misreading a client. It was letting prejudice cloud his judgment, an error that could cost him dearly in his career. Clearing her throat, Jessica spoke in a calm but firm voice, enunciating each word clearly. "I hope everyone here now understands that you should never judge a person's worth by superficial standards. I'm not only here to buy a jet, I'm here to remind you that respect for others is the truest measure of value." Marcus watched her with pride in his eyes. He knew she'd won more than a financial proof. She'd upheld her dignity and self-respect under the harshest pressure. He nodded quietly in encouragement. A few customers now regarded Jessica with genuine admiration instead of mockery. She hadn't just proven her wealth. She'd also liberated them from their own narrow-minded assumptions. Richard Davis still stood silent, his face pensive and mortified. Slowly, he turned and left the center of the showroom, as if he'd received a bitter yet necessary lesson in humility and respect. Jessica inhaled deeply and let a small, satisfied smile cross her lips. She knew she'd passed a pivotal test, not through anger or outrage, but through courage, composure, and steadfast will. Greg, standing at the showroom's edge, felt regret and fear wash over him like never before. He realized that his arrogance and bias had cost him an opportunity, not just in business but in life. It was a hard-earned lesson, and likely the most profound one he'd face in his entire sales career. Folding the check, Jessica stepped toward the accountant to finalize her purchase. Her footsteps echoed softly across the polished marble floor, a silent declaration of her complete triumph, and a reminder that true power resides not in outward glitz, but in a person's confidence and integrity. Jessica Morgan had just proven that beyond any doubt. As Jessica walked toward the accountant, the showroom remained wrapped in an awkward, heavy silence. Greg felt the full weight of dread pressing down on him. His heart pounded so loudly he could almost hear it, each beat a reminder that he'd just made the gravest mistake of his sales career. A cold sweat beaded on his brow as he caught the reproachful, disappointed gazes of Richard Davis and the other powerful clients around him. Determined to stop the slide, Greg hurried forward, his expression completely transformed. The arrogance and aloofness were gone. In their place was a frantic politeness, even panic creeping into his voice. "Miss Morgan, I'm so sorry. Clearly there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I was wrong to judge you so hastily. Please allow me to assist you and see this transaction through properly." He spoke rapidly, his hand trembling as he reached out to her, desperate to salvage some last shred of goodwill. But Jessica stood perfectly still, calmly watching the man who'd publicly scorned her, now forced to bow his head before the undeniable truth of her capabilities and character. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, Jessica met Greg's eyes steadily. There was no anger there, but absolutely no concession either. Her gaze pierced him so completely that for the first time, he truly understood the sting of shame and helplessness. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was quiet but unyielding, each word clear enough for everyone to hear. "I will never purchase anything from a place that does not know how to respect its customers." Her statement landed like a decisive blow to Greg's already shattered pride and confidence. He froze, ashen-faced, unable to utter another word. Nearby, Richard Davis exhaled, a flicker of regret passing over his features as he realized his own complicity in the morning's disgrace. He watched Jessica stride away from the showroom's center, each step radiating authority and self-respect. Today, he'd learned a harsh but necessary lesson about humility and treating others with dignity. The remaining customers stood speechless. No one dared speak. Shock, shame, and remorse colored their faces. Some avoided Jessica's eyes as she passed. Others nodded in quiet apology. Marcus looked on with pride and admiration. He understood that Jessica's victory went far beyond finances. She had proven that a person's true worth cannot be judged by superficial, unjust standards. Outside, the showroom door swung open, and bright sunlight poured in, welcoming Jessica back into the larger world. A world where she would never again have to prove her value by empty outward trappings. Greg remained frozen in place, his fists clenched in helpless remorse. The cruel words he'd once used to belittle Jessica now echoed painfully in his mind, a stark reminder of his own failings. He realized that arrogance and disrespect had cost him not only a valuable sale, but also a vital lesson in seeing people as they truly are. Meanwhile, Jessica stepped out into the sunlight, chin held high and confidence renewed. As the showroom doors closed slowly behind her, they left in their wake a heavy silence and the stunned, reflective faces of everyone who'd witnessed this unforgettable lesson. Jessica Morgan had departed, not merely from a private jet showroom, but from a place that once doubted her worth, leaving behind a powerful testament to self-respect, dignity, and the true measure of human value. The moment the showroom doors closed behind Jessica, she and Marcus stepped out into the blazing sunlight, leaving behind a heavy atmosphere and the stunned gazes of those still inside. Marcus noticed the thoughtful expression on Jessica's face. Though she appeared outwardly composed, her eyes revealed the disappointment and hurt she couldn't entirely hide. "You okay, Jessica?" Marcus asked gently, his tone full of concern. Jessica drew a deep breath, met his eyes, and nodded firmly. "I'm fine, but I can't let this keep happening. They need to understand that no one has the right to disrespect another based on appearance or skin color." Marcus nodded, his own eyes shining with conviction. "I completely understand. If you decide to move forward, I'm ready to represent you and see this through." Without hesitation, Jessica agreed. She knew in that moment it was no longer just a personal matter. It was a fight for justice and dignity for everyone who'd ever been demeaned by unfair prejudice. Over the next few days, Marcus sprang into action, gathering the evidence needed to hold both the showroom and its parent company fully accountable for their discriminatory conduct. As he tracked down witnesses, he received an urgent call from a young showroom employee, Emily Parker. Emily, who had only been on staff a few months, had witnessed the entire incident. Recognizing how crucial her testimony could be, Marcus arranged to meet her immediately in his law office. Emily arrived, looking anxious but determined. Sitting across from Marcus and Jessica, she said softly, "I know speaking up might cost me my job, but I can't stay silent. What I saw that day was unacceptable, and people need to know the truth." Marcus gave her a grateful look. "Miss Parker, please tell us exactly what you witnessed." Emily nodded, opened her phone, and tapped to play an audio file. She set the phone on the table and Greg's voice rang out unmistakably, full of mockery. "Who does she think she is walking in here like that? A young black woman dressed that way must be just here for social media clout. Ridiculous." The recording continued with more vicious remarks from other customers, including Richard Davis's authoritative, contemptuous tone. "Get over yourself, girl. People like you need to know your place." Jessica sat silent, her hand clenching as the insults washed over her again, but this time accompanied by a renewed determination. Marcus carefully noted every detail in the recording, knowing he held the key evidence they needed. When the recording ended, Marcus turned to Emily. "Miss Parker, are you willing to testify in court?" Emily didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. I know I won't be able to work there after this, but the truth matters more." Marcus nodded, voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you. What you're doing today helps not just Jessica, but could change how people treat each other." After Emily left, Marcus faced Jessica, his eyes brimming with resolve. "Now, we have solid evidence and a witness. We can bring the strongest possible case. The showroom and the parent company will pay for their racial discrimination and the serious violation of your dignity." Jessica returned his gaze with a proud, grateful smile. She knew the fight wouldn't be easy, but she also understood it was the right moment to show everyone, inside that showroom and in the broader world, that discrimination, prejudice, and disrespect are utterly unacceptable. This legal turning point marked a new chapter in Jessica's life, a powerful struggle for justice and human rights that she would pursue tirelessly until full accountability was achieved. The instant the trial began, the courtroom fell into a suffocating tension. Jessica sat quietly beside Marcus, her expression composed but her eyes burning with determination. Opposite them, the showroom's attorney, Andrew Collins, renowned for his sharp oratory and deft defense, adjusted his tie, striving to project confidence and calm. After a brief introduction, Marcus rose from his seat. He cast a steady, authoritative gaze toward the judge and jury, then began in a clear, resonant voice. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here today not over some minor misunderstanding, but over something far more serious: racial discrimination and the violation of personal dignity. To substantiate our claim, we respectfully submit to the most incontrovertible evidence." He pressed the playback button, and the room instantly fell silent. Greg's cold, mocking voice rang out as if he stood before the bench. "Who does she think she is? A young black woman dressed like that must be here just for social media clout. Ridiculous." Next came Richard Davis's commanding, disdainful tone. "Stop deluding yourself, girl. People like you ought to know your place." Each barb echoed through the courtroom like an invisible blade, weighing heavily on every listener. Jessica remained motionless, her hand tightening on the bench in front of her as emotions surged within her. Marcus glanced at her with empathy and resolve. When the recording ended, Marcus turned confidently to Mr. Collins. "Your Honor, these are not stray remarks or personal misunderstandings. This was intentional public humiliation, clear evidence of racial bias and social exclusion." Andrew Collins rose immediately, interrupting in a rush. "Your Honor, while those comments may have been inappropriate, they were thoughtless words spoken by individuals, not reflective of this showroom's culture or the parent company's policy. This is a minor incident, an isolated mistake." Marcus responded without hesitation, his tone razor-sharp. "Mr. Collins, you call that a minor incident, a so-called misunderstanding that unfolded publicly before dozens of witnesses for several minutes, yet no one intervened. A misunderstanding that everyone saw but chose to endorse by their silence?" He took a deliberate step forward, voice imbued with conviction. "No, Your Honor. This is not a mere misunderstanding. It is the hallmark of a corporate culture that permits, and even tacitly encourages, racially discriminatory behavior. A culture that allows employees and guests alike to demean individuals based solely on appearance or skin color." Marcus faced the jury squarely, emphasizing each word. "Today, Jessica Morgan speaks not only for herself, but for countless others who have suffered similar indignities without the means or courage to demand justice." Counsel for the defense attempted to interject, his face tightening. "Our company remains committed to equality and would never condone such behavior." But Marcus cut him off, voice cold and unyielding. "If that is truly your stance, why has Mr. Reynolds remained in a position of responsibility for so long? Why did no one step in to stop this conduct when it first occurred? Or were they complicit in the insults themselves?" His question sent the courtroom into a profound hush. The judge and jury leaned forward, their attention rapt. On the defense side, anxiety was plainly visible. Marcus concluded his argument with gravitas. Your Honor, it is time to send an unmistakable message. Any organization that tolerates or conceals discriminatory conduct and assaults on individual dignity must be held accountable under the law. Jessica met Marcus's gaze with gratitude and pride. He returned her look with a reassuring nod, an unspoken vow that they would not relent until true justice was done. The instant Marcus concluded his powerful argument, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. Judge Eleanor Mitchell, a woman with silvery hair, sharp eyes, and an unwavering sense of justice, drew in a measured breath, as though weighing every word before handing down her final ruling. The tension was so thick that one could almost hear the crowd's collective inhalations. Greg Reynolds sat motionless, his fists clenched, his ashen face betraying his anxiety and fear. He knew that in just a few minutes, the proud career he had painstakingly built might vanish entirely, brought down by his own arrogance and blind prejudice. Richard Davis, seated not far away, bowed his head in regret and shame, no longer the confident tycoon who had dared to challenge Jessica in the showroom. Finally, Judge Mitchell spoke, her voice clear and authoritative, eyes fixed on the defense. Having carefully reviewed all evidence and testimony, the court finds that this was not a mere misunderstanding, but a serious act of racial discrimination and an affront to personal dignity. Such behavior is intolerable in a civilized and equitable society. She paused briefly, then continued with even greater resolve. The court imposes a fine of $500,000 on both the showroom and its parent company, to compensate Miss Jessica Morgan for the emotional harm and damage to her reputation. Furthermore, the company is ordered to issue a formal public apology to Ms. Morgan in all major media outlets. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the courtroom at her ruling, but Judge Mitchell pressed on. In addition, the parent company must immediately implement mandatory anti-discrimination and equality training for all employees, under the supervision of an independent organization. This measure is necessary to prevent any recurrence of such conduct in the future. Her gaze turned to Greg Reynolds, her tone more severe than ever. As for Mr. Reynolds himself, given the clearly demonstrated conduct presented at trial, the court recommends that the company reconsider his continued employment, as he plainly fails to meet the minimum standards of ethics and respect required in the workplace. At once, the company's legal representative rose and nodded solemnly to the judge. Your Honor, we accept the court's decision in full and will comply immediately with all directives. We further announce that Mr. Greg Reynolds is no longer an employee of our company as of today. Greg bowed his head, attempting to hide his profound shame. He knew he had just lost everything he had worked for over so many years, undone by his own obstinacy and arrogance. Now, he would face the severe consequences, a shattered career and a ruined reputation. Meanwhile, Richard Davis and the other customers who had openly insulted Jessica felt overwhelming shame. Many avoided her gaze, some quietly left the courtroom in embarrassment. They realized they had contributed to a culture that tolerated injustice and discrimination, and today's verdict served as a powerful wake-up call to their deeply held biases. Jessica sat quietly, but inside she felt a tremendous relief. A gentle joy shone in her eyes, not because of the monetary award or her persecutor's punishment, but because justice had been served so clearly and decisively. Marcus gently placed a hand on her shoulder, his eyes brimming with pride and gratitude. Jessica, you did something extraordinary today. This victory isn't just yours. It's a triumph for everyone who's ever been treated unjustly like you were. Jessica offered a quiet, grateful smile and nodded. As she looked around the courtroom, she felt the strength of truth and justice in the air. The judge's ruling was not only a penalty for the showroom and those who wronged her, but also a stern reminder to anyone who still harbors prejudice and discrimination. The trial concluded, but its echo lingers, a powerful testament that every act of racial discrimination, however small, carries consequences. And Jessica Morgan, through her courage and steadfastness, has become a potent symbol in the fight against injustice. A few weeks after the verdict, and with justice served, Jessica knew her story wasn't quite over. The echo of the trial still resonated throughout the community, and she could feel a tangible shift in how people perceived the incident. She realized she needed to return to the showroom one more time, not to prove anything, but to send a clear message about self-respect and the respect every person deserves. One spring morning, Jessica arrived at the showroom in a striking black suit that spoke of power and confidence. Beside her stood Marcus, the lawyer and dear friend who had stood by her throughout this journey. As the showroom doors opened, the morning sun illuminated Jessica's proud silhouette. The staff inside immediately turned to watch, and an almost tangible hush fell over the space. Surprise and unease flashed across their faces. Many averted their eyes, ashamed and uncertain. In one corner, Greg Reynolds stood silently, shaking and clutching a stack of papers. His pale face betrayed the despair and hopelessness that had replaced his former arrogance. He saw at once that Jessica's return wasn't accidental. It was a powerful reminder of the price he paid for his racist and disrespectful behavior. Jessica walked slowly to the center of the showroom, pausing to survey the people around her before fixing her gaze on Greg and a few familiar customers who had insulted her. The air felt so heavy that no one dared breathe. Finally, Jessica spoke, her voice calm, yet ringing with conviction. "I'm not here to demand anything from you. I'm here to remind you of the respect every customer deserves." Greg flinched at her words. Jessica's eyes weren't angry or vengeful. They were sharp, authoritative, and dignified, as if etching this lesson indelibly into his memory. He bowed his head, unable to meet her gaze, filled with regret and shame. Jessica then turned to the other staff members, her tone measured and thoughtful. "I trust that after all that's happened, each of you understands we cannot judge others by appearances or personal biases. Disrespect toward a customer is disrespect toward yourselves and the profession you represent." Marcus stood beside her, nodding in support. His eyes shone with pride for his friend, the strong woman who had transformed her pain into a powerful defense of human dignity. Not far away, Richard Davis listened in deep shame. He recognized his own role in causing her hurt. Stepping forward, he bowed his head before Jessica and spoke with genuine remorse. "Jessica, I sincerely apologize. I was gravely wrong to treat you without respect. I've learned a valuable lesson from this, and I promise never to repeat that mistake." Jessica regarded him with measured empathy, yet she remained firm. "I accept your apology, Mr. Davis. More importantly, I hope you truly remember this lesson and use your influence to prevent anyone else from suffering the same way." Richard nodded earnestly, his resolve plain. He understood that Jessica's return was not about revenge, but about creating a positive change for everyone who might make the same mistakes. Finally, Jessica looked at Greg once more, her eyes stern but tinged with compassion. "Mr. Reynolds, I hope this experience has truly awakened you. You must understand that no one deserves to be treated the way you treated me. Remember this lesson and strive to become a better person." Greg remained silent, but his eyes reflected profound contrition. With that, Jessica turned and walked out of the showroom, Marcus by her side, his pride unmistakable. The bright sunlight outside highlighted her triumphant stride as she left behind a showroom transformed. A place now fully aware that dignity and respect for customers are the highest values in business and in life. Jessica Morgan's exit became a powerful symbol, reminding everyone that worth and respect can never be compromised, and that ultimately, justice belongs to those brave enough to stand up for it. As Jessica stepped out of the showroom, the gentle sunlight fell around her like a silent congratulations. She felt lighter than ever, as if all her burdens had been lifted. Beside her, Marcus offered a small, knowing smile, sensing the rare peace that now enveloped his friend after so many stormy days. Before long, Jessica and Marcus walked into the neighboring competitor's showroom, a company renowned for its customer care and respect. The moment Jessica crossed the threshold, every employee greeted her warmly and sincerely. They showed genuine appreciation for the opportunity to serve such a strong, admirable woman. Linda Harris, the sales representative, approached with a bright smile and provided Jessica with detailed, thoughtful guidance. Here, Jessica's worth was measured not by her attire, skin tone, or outward appearance, but by her character and real achievements. It didn't take long for Jessica to make her choice. She signed the contract for the Gulfstream she'd always dreamed of. As her pen met the paper, she felt a powerful sense of pride, not only because a personal dream was coming true, but because she had emerged victorious in a fight for dignity and justice. With the paperwork complete, Jessica and Marcus left the showroom filled with a quiet, indescribable satisfaction. Marcus regarded her with admiration. "You've fulfilled your dream, Jessica. But more importantly, you've sent a powerful message to everyone." Jessica smiled softly, her gaze distant yet resolute. "Thank you, Marcus, but this isn't just my victory. It's a victory for everyone who's ever been underestimated or treated unfairly. We must never stay silent in the face of injustice." That evening, Jessica returned home to the warm embrace of her family. Over dinner, in the comforting glow of the dining room, she recounted every challenging yet meaningful moment of her journey. Her loved ones listened intently, their eyes shining with genuine pride. In a voice both emotional and unwavering, Jessica told them, "What I went through wasn't just to defend my own honor, it was to prove something vital, that no one's value should ever be judged by outward appearances. That's the most important lesson I've learned, and I hope everyone understands it so no one else ever has to endure what I did." Marcus sat beside her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder, his eyes bright with pride and resolve. "Jessica is absolutely right. Justice doesn't arrive on its own. We must fight for it, and we must never remain silent in the face of wrongdoing. What Jessica has done exemplifies the courage and conviction needed to stand against injustice." Her family nodded, their admiration clear. They understood that Jessica's journey had been far from easy, but it had been richly worthwhile, opening new doors to fairness and respect for all. Elsewhere, Greg Reynolds sat alone in his modest apartment, reflecting on the grave mistakes he'd made. He felt profound regret as he realized how much he'd lost to his own arrogance and prejudice. This would be a lesson he carried for the rest of his life. Richard Davis, once a powerful figure in the business world, sat pensively in his office. He recognized the invaluable lesson he'd learned about humility and respect. He vowed to use his influence to ensure such errors never occurred again. As Jessica's story spread through the community, she became a powerful symbol of self-respect, fairness, and human dignity. Many drew inspiration from her journey and found the courage to stand against injustice and racism in their own lives. Throughout her journey, Jessica understood that her challenges were far from easy, but they taught her and countless others a crucial truth. that a person's true worth lies in their dignity, self-respect, and how they treat others, never in superficial appearances. That is the strongest message Jessica wishes to share with everyone. A message of respect, justice, and the courage to defend those values, no matter the hardships or obstacles. If you loved this story and want to spread its powerful message, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss future inspiring videos. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.